All right, well, good morning. We're in part 2 of a message series we're calling It's Not You, It's Me. It's really you, but we're just saying that. And this is about relationships. This is specifically about romantic relationships. And really the heart behind this, why we're doing this, why we're spending several weeks here, is that my desire, the desire, I believe God's desire, is for you to have happy and fulfilled romantic relationships. And if you're married, I want you to have an amazing marriage. I want you to love your marriage. I want you to, can't wait till you can get home in the evening so you can be with your spouse. And if you're single, if you are dating or want to be married, my heart's desire is that you will make decisions now that will have healthy and positive impacts on your future relationships, maybe your future marriage. And here's the deal. I've been doing this a long time. As a pastor, I just hear too many heartbreaking stories. I just see so many people make decisions that they think are smart, but they're dumb, right? And they end up sabotaging their future relationships, their future marriages. And so we're in part 2 today. Just real quick, last week we were in part 1. If you missed it, you can check out the podcast. We basically, last week, talked about the idea of the right person myth. It's this myth, we all buy into it. It's the fairy tale Disney princess myth, right? That one day when I meet my Prince Charming, one day when I meet the right person, then everything will be okay. It doesn't matter what decisions I made, everything will be okay. And we kind of try to debunk that myth and basically said, hey, it's not about finding the right person, but rather it's about becoming the right person. And we asked, you said, hey, if you're married, are you the kind of spouse you want? Like, well, I want my spouse to do all of these things. Like, well, do you do them? If you're single and you're looking, right, you're dating, like, are you the kind of person you're looking for? Are you the kind of person that you want to date? And today, we're going to flip the page to part 2 of this series, and it's going to be kind of serious. It's going to be troubling. Some things we're going to talk about are sad, they're heartbreaking, and ultimately what we're going to talk about today breaks the heart of God. And so can I just pray over us as we kind of enter into this conversation? God, I thank you that you're here. I look around a room full of amazing people, men and women, so much talent, so much passion, so much energy, God. And I believe that you have us in this room today for a purpose. And God, I know that what we're going to talk about today is hard. It's heartbreaking. It breaks your heart, God, but I pray that we can attack it head on, God, and we can see that you are a God of hope, that you are a God of life, God, and that you have so much purpose for us in this, God. And so we love you, and we pray this now in the name of Jesus. Amen. So we're just going straight at it today, so you'll see the first graphic on the screen. The first experience with sexual intercourse for more than 3 million U.S. women, many of them in their teens, was forced or coerced, according to a study that just actually came out a few weeks ago. If you do the math on that, that's 1 in 16 women in the United States. Sexual violence, which is any kind of sexual activity where consent is not given, it affects millions of people every year in the United States. In fact, according to the CDC, more than 1 in 3 women, 1 in 3, that's a third, have experienced sexual violence involving physical contact at some point in their life. 1 in 3. For males, it's 1 in 4, by the way. Every 73 seconds, another person in the United States is sexually assaulted. 1 out of every 6 U.S. women have been the victim of an attempted or completed rape in their lifetime. The chances are, in a room this size and the size of our church this morning, that you, someone you love, someone you know, someone you care about, has experienced sexual assault, sexual violence, rape, or abuse. And I want you to know this morning that breaks God's heart. But there's hope. There is hope. And what we're talking about today, it's horrible. It's sad. It makes me angry. It makes me sad. I mean, as the husband of a beautiful wife, as the father of a precious 7-year-old daughter, which if anybody touches her, I will be in jail. As the pastor to an amazing group of people, hundreds of people that I have the privilege to being the pastor of. And I just want you to know that this is not how it should be. That these statistics, these facts, this is not okay. This cannot continue. And so this morning, for a few minutes, I'm going to talk specifically to men. I'm going to talk to married men. I'm going to talk to single men. I'm going to talk to followers of Jesus, Christian men. Those of you who are dating, I just want to talk to you straight up. And I want to talk to you about your view of, your attitude toward, and your treatment of women. In fact, I would say today, if you're here and you're just maybe checking church out and you're not sure about the whole Jesus God thing, I would say that what we're going to talk about today is so compelling that you should really consider a relationship with Jesus just based on what we're going to look at today. And so let me just give you a little context and then we're going to dive in. You need to know that when Jesus walked on the earth 2,000 years ago, when he bust onto the scene, that the view of, the attitude toward, and the treatment of women was horrendous. It was terrible. Here's what you need to know. At the time of Jesus, women were literally commodities, property, no rights, no voting, no testifying in court. If you study the culture of the time that Jesus walked on the earth, you'll know that marriage in the Greek and Roman culture, it was actually at an all-time low. And the reason it was at an all-time low is that because men, mostly upper-class men, men with affluence, they were refusing to marry. Like, why get married? Instead of being married, they could just have sex with slaves. Prostitution was legal. And so that was even encouraged as an alternative, as a form of birth control. And so during that culture, there was on more than one occasion, the Roman Senate of the Roman culture actually was going to introduce a bill into the government that would actually make it mandatory to get married. Many men, including upper class men, they just viewed marriage, they viewed children as burdens. But of course, women were held to a different standard. Women where virginity was demanded of brides and chastity was demanded of wives. In that culture, the drowning of baby girls, of taking baby girls down to the river and just drowning them, it was actually considered reasonable and commonplace. And it was a way to keep families from having to split up their estate. And so here's what's going on. This is the culture. This is the view of, the treatment of, the attitude toward women. And Jesus comes into this. He comes into this culture and it's ugly and it's nasty and it's sad and it's infuriating. And into this culture, which honestly reflects our culture more than we probably want to admit, here comes Jesus. And Jesus in the first church, they modeled and they taught a new way, a different way. And Jesus and the first followers, the first disciples, they gave men, Christian men, instructions. And they said, hey, what we're about to tell you, it's a total departure from the norms of our culture. What I'm about to tell you is totally different from the attitudes and the practices and the behaviors of our culture. What we're about to tell you is so different from how things are done and what is accepted. And what was crazy is these first followers, these men, these Christian men, they actually listened and they actually embraced it and they actually lived it. In the early church, it just exploded in population and attendance because of this. And so what did Jesus teach? What did these first followers teach? Let's jump into this a little bit. Did you know that the longest recorded conversation between Jesus and anybody was actually in John chapter 4? John chapter 4. It's on page, there's a Bible in your chair. It's on page 726. I don't have time to read the entire story to you, but here's the story. Again, if you're a church person, maybe you're familiar with this story. This is the story where Jesus had been traveling with his disciples. They had been on a long walk, and John, who's recording this as an eyewitness, he says that they're walking and they come up to this well, and he says that Jesus is exhausted, that he's tired. He's been walking and traveling for days, and he comes up to this well, and John tells us that Jesus is sitting at a well, and there comes a Samaritan woman. And she comes up and Jesus asks her for a drink. Now, again, you can read that story. Maybe you've heard it before and you're like, well, that's cool. Jesus is thirsty. He's tired, dusty. He wants a little drink. Here's this woman, right? And a casual reading of this story misses what's happening here. In fact, you get a little picture of how crazy this is when you see in verse 27, it says that the disciples, these guys that were Jesus, said they had gone into the town to get some food. And that they were coming back, and it says when they came back and saw Jesus sitting at the well talking to this Samaritan woman, it says that they were astonished or they were surprised. The word there means like they were shocked. Like, what is he doing? We don't do that. We don't talk to women like that. And is he asking her for a drink of water? Is he going to drink out of her Nalgene? Because we don't do that. And John tells us that they were shocked. You got to remember John 4. This is early in Jesus' ministry. So these disciples, they had not been with him very long at this point. But they're thinking, what is he doing? We don't do this, Jesus. And Jesus goes on and has this conversation with her. Again, I don't have time to read it. You can read it later this afternoon. But one point of the conversation, Jesus is talking to her, and he says something like this. He says, hey, I know that you've had 5 husbands. And I know that the man with whom you're living with now is not your husband. You're not married. And maybe if you're a church person, you've heard this taught before. And maybe you've heard this taught from the angle that she was sexually immoral or unfaithful. But really, if you know the culture, you know that in that culture, divorces were rare. And there is no record at all in history of any woman in that culture being able to initiate a divorce. So we got to know, did those marriages end in divorce initiated by the husband, or did they end in death? We don't know, but what we definitely know is this, that here's a woman who has experienced grief. This is a woman who's experienced rejection. And her current arrangement was not about casual sexuality. In fact, in that culture, a man could take any lower class woman and bring her into his current marriage as a concubine. And so here's what we know. We know she's poor because she's drawing her own water. And here is this woman, and don't miss this, okay? Because what Jesus does here is so radical, is so revolutionary. Here's this woman, and Jesus looks her in the eye. And Jesus has a conversation with her. And Jesus is saying, hey, I see you. I see you. I know you. Your life's been hard. You've been rejected. You've experienced grief. I see you. I know you've been treated bad. And I know you, I see you, and I care. I care about you. And Jesus sat at that well, and he engaged this woman in a deep, personal discussion about her relationship with God. And John tells us at the end of the story that she went back into the village, back into the town, and she couldn't stop talking about it. Well, it's no wonder that she couldn't stop talking about it, because Jesus saw her. He saw her for herself. He saw her as a person who had her own identity. He saw her as a person who had her own value. Jesus didn't view her as a commodity. He didn't view her as a piece of property. He didn't view her as a sexual object, or he didn't view her as something for an object for his own personal gratification. He just looked at her. And he viewed her and he treated her like a person, like a human, like someone who was actually created in the image of God. Maybe you could even say it this way, someone who is a daughter of God. And she mattered. And she mattered to Jesus. It's revolutionary. Again, you can just kind of read through John 4 and go, oh, that's cute. Well, Jesus and the well and some water. Let's teach our kids that cool little story. I can't emphasize enough. I can't emphasize enough what Jesus is doing here. What he's doing to his 12 disciples, what he's doing for me, what he's doing for you. He is modeling, he is teaching, he is showing us a new way. And guys, you and I, we've got to pay attention, because he's trying to teach us how to view. He's trying to teach us about our attitude and our treatment toward women. What's interesting is there that day, when all that was going on at the well, there was a guy named Peter. Peter was one of the followers of Jesus, kind of a crazy, loudmouth fisherman. And Peter was one of those 12 disciples. In fact, he was one of kind of an inner circle. Him and Jesus were bros. And Peter was there that day. He was at Samaria that day. And Peter saw with his own eye, like he eyewitnessed how Jesus interacted with this woman, how he taught her and loved her and cared for her. Like Peter saw this. Peter saw how he treated this woman, but he also saw how Jesus treated all women. And years later, after this event, Peter would actually write a letter. And he would write a letter that he sent to the church. He said, listen up, men. Listen up, women. Listen up, those of you who are part of the church, who are followers. Listen up. And Peter wrote this letter teaching a new way. And I want to show you what he wrote. And he wrote this specifically to husbands. Here's what he wrote. It's in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7. And here's what he wrote. Again, Peter, eyewitness. He saw Jesus. He writes this. Verse 7, he says this. In the same way, you husbands must give honor to your wives. You must give honor to your respect. This is communicating the idea of value and dignity. This is like assigning your wife honor. This is like recognizing her honored position. Now again, we read this in English and like, okay, but this was so un-Roman, so un-Greek. I mean, this was revolutionary. This was countercultural. This was in a culture that viewed women like commodities. Like, I can do whatever I want to with women. I can have sex with whoever I want to and just dispose of them. That was the culture. And Peter's writing these husbands. He says, nope, that's not the way of Jesus. That's not what Jesus modeled and taught. That's not the way. He said, no, honor. Honor. This is this kind of idea of a deep desire to understand your wife. This is like getting to know your wife beyond the surface. This is a sensitivity to her needs. This is a desire to respond to her needs with knowledge and compassion and grace. He says, honor. He says, in the same way you husbands give honor to your wives. And he keeps going. He says this. He says, treat your wife with understanding as you live together. Treat your wife with the word understanding here, it could also be translated consideration. We talked a little bit about that last week in part 1. Like, considerate of her feelings. Like, what are her needs? What are her feelings? And then acting courageously toward. He says, considerate of her as you live together. That just basically in your day-to-day relationships. Now again, we can just read this as casual, but this was revolutionary. And you can tell how revolutionary it was based on the attitudes that people had toward divorce in that culture. In fact, divorce in that culture said that a legitimate cause for divorce was anything the husband deemed displeasing. So at any point the husband's like, I'm not happy, divorced, gone. And here's Peter, he's writing, he's like, no. Jesus and Peter are like taking the whole culture, the whole view of women, the whole treatment of women, the whole attitude of women, and they're basically turning it upside down and say, no, you just say commodity, you say property, you say whatever we want to do. We're saying value and identity, a priceless jewel, a daughter of God. And he flips it upside down. He keeps writing. He says, she may be, again, your wife, she may be weaker than you are, but she is your equal partner in God's gift of new life. Now, the word weaker here does not mean inferior or the opposite. The actual meaning of this word in the original language is referring to physical strength. So the idea that like 80% of you husbands could probably beat your wife in an arm wrestling match. The other 20, like Steve, you'd have no shot, right? So it's just referring to physical strength. And so he's saying, Peter is basically, he's given a new vision. He's saying it's a new day. He's like, guys, boys in this culture, they're raised up in a culture in this world that he's writing to. They're raised up in a culture that says might equals right. The strong rule and lord it over the weak. That's the culture that they were grown in. And now Peter's given a new vision. He's saying, no. The new vision is this. The strong actually leverage their strength for the weak. Ooh, don't miss that. The strong actually leverage their strength for the weak. Well, what a picture of the gospel. The idea that Jesus, he sees us wherever you are, whatever your needs, whatever. He says, I see you. I see your problems. I see your struggles. And guess what? I want to leverage my strength for you. What a picture of the church, right? The church, what's the church supposed to be, right? A community of people, and sometimes things are going really well, and guess what? Sometimes you struggle. And what do you need, right? You need the community of people to come around you, right? The strong leverage their strength for the weak. He says, hey, she may be physically weaker, but she is your, look at the word he uses, equal partner in God's gift of new life. He's saying, hey, in God's eyes, it's equal. Again, so countercultural. And not only that, she is an heir with you to God's gracious gift of life. She's an equal recipient of God's grace. You're a son of God. She's a daughter of God. You guys are equal in God's eyes. And then this last part. Look at this last. This is awesome. Look what he says. Again, he's writing to husbands. He's writing to followers of Jesus. He says, treat her as you should, so your prayers will not be hindered. It's pretty awesome, huh? Treat her as you should, so your prayers will not be hindered. One author put it this way. I thought this was a good unpacking of this. He says, a husband's spiritual health depends in significant measure on the way that he treats his wife. Let's just say that again. A husband's spiritual health depends in a significant way on the way that he treats his wife. When he wrote this was revolutionary. I mean, it was revolutionary. And I think it's revolutionary now, today, in Miami in 2019. This theme of how to treat women, of your attitude toward, of your treatment of it, keeps going. There was another follower of Jesus, right? He just picks right up on this. His name was Paul. Came the Apostle Paul. He persecuted the church. He had this encounter with Jesus. He helped start all these churches, and he would write these letters to the church, and these themes just keep coming. In fact, he wrote one letter to the church at Galatia, and he wrote this. Galatians chapter 3, 26. Again, he's writing to the church. He says, for you are all, that's all of you, men and women, children of God, sons and daughters of God, through how? Through faith in Jesus. And all who have been united with Christ in baptism. We talked about baptism earlier, but this is the idea of putting your faith in Jesus, and that first step of following Jesus is being baptized. That's why we celebrate baptism so much around here. He says, put your faith in Christ like putting on new clothes. And then look what he says in 28. This is revolutionary when he's writing this. He says, listen, guys, there's no longer Jew or Gentile. There's no longer slave or free. There's no longer male or female. He says, for we are all one in Christ. And what is he doing? He's saying, you know what Jesus did? He broke all the barriers. There are all these cultural barriers. There are all these walls. There are all these barriers. You know what Jesus is doing? You know what he did? You know what he modeled? You know what he taught? You know the new way? You know the new vision? We're one in Jesus. All of these walls are broken. And so guys, men, Jesus is teaching. He's calling us. He's challenging us. He's saying, listen, guys, you got to think differently. Listen, guys, you got to make up your mind to behave differently. I don't care what the social norms are. I don't care what people do. I don't care what's on YouTube. I don't care what's in common. No, you got to make up your mind to be different. You got to make up your mind to think differently. And what was true in the first century is still true today. That we must think differently. We must behave differently. Our view of, our attitude toward our treatment of women must align with the model and the teaching of Jesus. Now, in just a few minutes we have, I just want to get super practical with you. And I'll just get really practical. Here's a couple of just really practical things that you need to hear and I need to hear. The first thing is you need to eliminate media that reinforces the idea that women are commodities. Like, what are you watching? What are you listening to? What are you feeding your mind? What's on TV? What's in the movies? What's on YouTube? What's in the music? Like, what is it teaching you? What does it teach about women? What does it teach about the attitude toward or the treatment of women? How are women being treated? You need to eliminate. You need to get rid of. You need to stop. Some of you need to eliminate some of the things that you are watching and consuming. Let me get a little more specific. Some of you need to go through your Spotify, your Google, or your Apple, however you consume your music. Some of you need to go through there and you need to delete any song that refers to a woman as a hoe or a bitch. You need to get rid of it. Well, I just like the beat. It's a catchy tune. It's popular. I just like that. Right, you need to take this seriously. You need to go through and you need to look seriously. What is the music that you are consuming? What is it teaching you? What is it saying about the view of, the treatment of, the attitude toward women? Some of you need to eliminate and get rid of. You need to just delete. Let's go at it here. You ready? I don't think you're ready. Some of you need to end your relationship with erotic imagery and pornography. Yeah, I knew it was going to be quiet right here. All right. Did you know that porn is a teacher? It teaches you stuff. It teaches you a lot of things. Here's some of the things it teaches you. We'll show a couple of these on the screen. Porn teaches you that real bodies aren't good enough. You know what porn teaches you? It teaches you that one body isn't good enough. You know what else porn teaches you, husbands? It teaches you that your wife's body won't be good enough. Well, it's not hurting anybody. It's just me. It's not really doing anything. That's the lie. The lie is, it's just not hurting. It's just me. It's not hurting anybody. Do you know this? There's tons of research on this. I could spend hours talking through this, but pornography is not a pastime. It's actually a pathway. Pornography leads somewhere. It takes you somewhere. Research is just backing up what Jesus has been teaching for years, right? Research is actually showing that people that view pornography, there's actually changes that happen in the brain. Like there's actual studies that show this. Research says that pornography is an addictive behavior that actually causes relational problems. Right? That pornography, there are impacts, there are effects. In fact, I would say this, and again, I could go off for days on this, but pornography impacts you. Oh, it's not hurting anybody. No, it's hurting you. It's hurting you. It's hurting your individual well-being. There's tons of data now that says that the viewing of pornography actually impacts your mental health. That there's the more pornography someone views, the more likely they are to be depressed, to have mental health issues. Pornography affects your sexual attitudes. It affects your sexual behaviors. It impacts you. Not only does it impact you, it impacts your relationships. Again, the goal of this is I want you to have healthy and happy and fulfilled relationships, romantic relationships. But pornography impacts your relationships. The expectations regarding sexuality and relationships, the negative effects it has on relationships with the quality, the satisfaction, and the commitment. The data on this is overwhelming. The viewing of pornography increases conflict in relationships and it increases the likelihood of divorce. Period. The data doesn't lie. The more someone views pornography, the more likely they are to end their marriage in divorce. But it goes even deeper than this. Not only does it impact you, not only does it impact your relationship, it goes into societal things that are just sickening. Stuff that makes us want to throw up. The research says that pornography increases sexual violence, sexual assault, rape, child pornography, and human sex trafficking. Right? There's a study that came out recently. Again, I could go off on some, I don't want to give you too much data, but it was a study of 14 to 19-year-old girls. And basically, the study said that those who are in the 14 to 19-year-old demographic who consume pornographic videos, that they are significantly greater, the likelihood is significantly greater that they will actually be a victim of sexual assault. There's another study, it's actually 22 studies they did over 7 countries, so it's a pretty international study. It said that the consumption of pornography is associated with physical aggression, with abuse and assault. The more a person consumes pornography, the more likely they are to be a sexual predator, to be one who assaults and who abuses. The bottom line of all this is pornography is like a drug. It deadens your appetite for reality, for real women. The bottom line of all this is pornography destroys relationships, it destroys marriages. The bottom line of all this is pornography distorts the view of, the attitude of, and the treatment of women. And the real sad part of all this is I believe it breaks the heart of God. Because sons of God, daughters of God, are hurt. They're abused. They're misused. And Jesus, when he saw that woman at the well, he didn't see an object for his gratification. He saw a person, a daughter of God, someone created in the image of God. And friend, this breaks the heart of God. These statistics that I read at the beginning, 1 in 3, 1 in 6, 73 seconds, it breaks the heart of God. And some of us in this room, we need to go clean house. You need to cancel some things. You need to give some of your friends a passcode to some of your things. Some of you need to do what I do. There's a couple of programs out there that I am huge fans of. One is called Covenant Eyes. The other one is called X3 Watch. And these programs, I have them on my computers. I have them on my phone. And there's two guys that every single thing I look at on my computer and every single thing I look at on my phone, they get a weekly report that shows them every single thing that I view on my phone or on my computer. And they get a report and it triggers, it signals if there's anything objectionable in there. And then I get a phone call every Tuesday, right? I have a set standing phone call every Thursday, actually, every Thursday afternoon. And the first question out of the guy's mouth is, what are you doing? What are you looking at? How are you doing? And some of you need to get there. Like there's hope, there's help. You need to get there because Jesus is calling us to a new standard. He's modeling, He's teaching a new standard. And some of you, maybe you're dating. You need to take some time off. You need to step back. Some of you maybe need to get help. You know what's really remarkable is if you think about this, is that Jesus, He planted seeds way back 2,000 years ago that have produced growth. And a lot of that comes back to the way that He treated people, and especially women. In fact, there was a sociologist, and I love this kind of stuff. There was a sociologist, his name was Rodney Stark, and he was a professor at the University of Washington State out in Seattle. And he was a professor of sociology, and he was an agnostic. So he's not coming at this from a Christian perspective. But he was just so moved. He said, how does this obscure sect, I mean, this one guy with these 12 disciples, and maybe at the time Jesus died, there was 125 people. Like, how does it go from that, this small group of people in the middle of nowhere in history, how does it go from that to the greatest and largest movement in the history of the world? Like, how does that happen? How are there millions, some say even billions, of followers of Jesus in the world today? How does that happen? And so he studied this. How does this happen? In fact, what's interesting about his story is he started as an agnostic, and by the end of his study, he became a follower of Jesus because he said, the evidence is overwhelming. And it came down to this simple idea. You can read the hundreds and hundreds of pages of research he did, but I'll save you the time and give you the bottom line. He said this, the early followers of Jesus, they actually adopted His teachings. They actually listened to Him, and they actually put into practice what He said. And so in this crazy culture where women were commodities and property and could just be disposed of at any point, they actually flipped that and began to live the way of Jesus. And women were not seen as second class, but they were rather seen as women, as children of God, as made in the image of God, as daughters of God. And they were welcomed into the church. They were given a seat at the table. And it was revolutionary then, and I believe it's revolutionary now. And what happened was that the movement of God, the church exploded because of the simple way that they responded. Friends, I'll say this to you today. Wherever you are, whatever you've done in the past, whatever has happened, that today's a new day. That we serve a God full of hope, a God full of grace. And maybe you've experienced something in your past, some type of abuse, and people have done things to you. And I don't want to minimize that in any way and make it sound easy, but there is hope because of Jesus. Maybe you're here today and you're addicted to something. You're into things deeper than you ever want to admit. And it's all secret and nobody really knows. And you look good this morning, you got a nice shirt on. There's a way, there's healing, there's a way forward. And I just want to say a word of prayer over you. Can I just say a word of prayer over you? And I believe, I know that God is here.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. We hope that it brought you encouragement and brought you hope for the rest of the day. If you have any questions or like to talk to someone, you could email us at hello@mammychurch.com. If you'd also like to support what we're doing here, you can go to mammychurch.churchcenter.com/giving. Make sure to subscribe. We love you. Thanks for watching.